Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. Our guest today is an internationally recognised expert at fully connected leadership and communication. She is a trusted mentor to executives and leaders and a highly sought after speaker and trainer. Her clients include associations, non-profits and governments, as well as iconic brands such as BlueScope, Westpac, Toll and Microsoft. You may have seen her featured in Smart Company, This Working Life, The Saturday Paper, Blue Sky News, ABC Radio and CEO World Magazine. Known for helping leaders and teams achieve real connection and sustained engagement, she is also passionate about encouraging organisations to talk about menopause in the workplace. Mel has twice in 2022 and 2023 been recognised by Leaders Hum as one of the top 200 biggest voices in leadership globally, one of only 7 Australians on the list. She is also the host of the podcast This Connected Life and author of 2 books, the best-selling Fully Connected and Social Association. I'm very excited to welcome Mel Kettle. Welcome to the Made for More podcast. I'll be sharing my experiences along with some actionable advice to take your leadership to the next level. Introducing your host, it's me, Ali Nitschke. I'm a leadership and courageous conversations expert, a Nutella lover, a mother of 4 young boys, a wife and a dance floor junkie. I'm here to give you the motivation you need to level up, lead yourself, lead your team and your business. Let's go. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by our special guest today. Hello, Mel. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Ali. It's great to see you and to have this chance to have a chat with you. It's been ages.
It has been ages. I'm very excited to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about some of both of our passion projects and favourite topics all around connection, communication, and of course, the very hot topic right now of boundaries. But before we get into all of that, can you give a little bit of background about where did you come from and where are you going?
Oh, where did I come from? That's a really interesting question. I grew up on the New South Wales Central Coast near Gosford, lived in a lot of different places before moving there when I was 8. Won't bore you with all the details. These days I live in Caloundra on the Sunshine Coast and I work as a leadership communications specialist, helping teams, leaders and teams communicate so they create real connection and sustained engagement. And I guess I started off in that with an interest in connection and engagement when I was in high school, and I really wanted to be a Rotary Exchange student. And I was very shy, very introverted, and so my application was rejected the first time around. Fortunately, they had a dropout. I love this guy forever. And I got a second chance, and I had been warned that if I didn't show more of my personality and talk to more people, then I wouldn't get accepted. And so that was when I realized that you had to sometimes push yourself out of your comfort zone and, really make an effort with getting to know people if you wanted to achieve your goals in life.
I love it. So where was the Rotary Exchange to?
So I went to Canada. I went to a little town called Brandon, Manitoba, which is smack bang in the middle of the country, 100 kilometres north of the US border. And the day that I arrived, it was a balmy -11 and it was 35 degrees the day that I left Gosford. And about a week later, it was -40 and it stayed at -40 for quite a while. So it was definitely a climate culture shock.
No, thank you. I hate being cold. So that was your little foray into understanding about communication. But you and I have had a conversation about this over dinner. Tell me a little bit more about your eclectic background, because it's a wild story.
So my first job when I was in my first year of uni, I might have even been in high school. Anyway, my first job was helping out at my dad's company. He worked for a traffic management consultancy and as a town planner, and they were doing some traffic management studies in snowy mountains in New South Wales. And so I was hired to go down and stay in this amazing house in Jindabyne for 10 days and stand at the gate to the ski patrol or the ski tube with a clicker and count how many people got onto the ski tube. And then somebody else was counting how many cars there were. And the good thing about this whole thing is the weather was absolutely atrocious. And so they called off the study I think we did 2 days between all of us. And so I spent, 10 days in this amazing house with a spa and a sauna, and tickets to go and see Transvision Vamp.
And you thought, like, this is living. I've made it. I've made it from a career perspective.
If this is what consulting is, sign me up, baby.
Yeah. So good. So how do you think then did you get into talking about, some of your topics around connection and communication, working with leaders to sustain engagement? What was the prompter?
Very early in my career, after my traffic management clicking, I was a conference organizer, and that really taught me the benefit and the value in having solid relationships and being able to communicate with influence and with impact. And watching some of these amazing speakers and some very mediocre speakers get paid a lot of money made me realize that there was just so much opportunity in this space. From that job, I moved to Queensland. I was the marketing manager of the Brisbane Festival, where I worked with massive number of stakeholders and, again, a whole range of different communication skills, from performing artists through to the guys that loaded the soundstage. And from there, I went into work with government. I worked for the Office of Fair Trading for quite a few years. And when I first joined the office, we had 100 pieces of legislation that we had to communicate to business and consumers in Queensland. And not only did we have 100 pieces of legislation, but every legislation was related to a completely different stakeholder group. And so I learned really quickly that if I couldn't communicate either verbally or in writing or through body language or through other means, then we weren't going to get our messages across. And particularly because we had a really tiny budget to do this. And so we had to be clever and we had to be creative. And so it taught me so many amazing skills.
It's amazing, isn't it? So I often will speak to leaders around communication agility, so their ability to flex depending on the audience. And it sounds like you did that a lot with the verbal communication, written communication. You said you had a tiny budget and had to be creative.
Yeah.
What's your favourite creative way that you helped push out this message on a shoestring?
The main thing that we did was we used our stakeholders.
Yeah.
So we used the industry associations that represented the stakeholder group that had the most to gain and lose from the legislation not being correctly interpreted. And so we used them. So when we developed a communication strategy around the revamp of the Property Agents and Motor Dealers Act, we worked really closely with the RACQ and with the Real Estate Industry Association of Queensland and with other government departments, because they had mailing lists that we didn't. And, this was also in my event management days were in the 90s, and my time in Queensland government was in the early 2000s. And so the internet was very fledgling and social media didn't exist. So in quite a few of those
good old days.
Yeah. So in quite a few of those jobs, I had to develop the first website for these organisations and for these projects. And so I also got really, really good at telling people why we needed this website, this newfangled thing, and why we needed email, which was never going to last, by the way. Little Missy, email won't last, is what one of my clients told me. I would love to go back to him now and say, when was the last time you went to the post office?
Yes, love that.
So it was just understanding people's pain points and then working out how do you address them in a way that makes them believe that they had the idea. I'm very good at that.
Influence.
I'm very good at that. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And so tell me a little bit around how that transitions now to the leaders that you work with. Obviously, social media has become its own communication mode and model in its own right. If we talk about some of the Gen Z that are now entering the workforce, they don't know a world without social media. In fact, that's probably their main form of communication. How does what you learned back then help you with helping leaders with what they do right now?
So I really think that while the tools that we use to communicate have changed and evolved, the fundamentals of communication have not. If you aren't communicating the right message to the right person at the right time and in the right way, using the right platform, then they're never going to get that message. And so communication hasn't actually occurred. You've just been broadcasting. And so the number one thing I teach my clients is to work out who do they need to engage with and who do they need to influence, and what is it they know about those people or those groups of people, and in terms of where do they go to get information, what platforms are the first places they go for the kind of information that you're imparting. And sometimes it's social media, and sometimes it's billboards, and sometimes it's having a conversation and picking up the phone. And then what are the platforms and the ways that you communicate so that you have the biggest impact? And it's really different for a CEO who's new in an organization to, say, a CEO who's been promoted from within. They've got different kinds of ways to communicate, to get their message out, because one of them's new to the organization and one of them might have been there for 20 years. And so then you look at what are the kinds of relationships you want to have, and how do you develop those relationships as quickly as possible so that it's beneficial to all parties.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there when it comes to going, how do we get the right message out to the right people? And also, what's the perspective that they're coming from, i.e. your CEOs, but also what's the perspective of how it's going to be delivered? What do you think are some of the biggest stumbling blocks when it comes to communication these days? I mean, you and I have both built our businesses and our profession around helping leaders communicate. Why is it so hard, do you think?
Everybody thinks they're a communicator is probably the first reason. And everybody can speak and everybody can have a voice, but just because you can speak and have a voice doesn't mean you're actually communicating your message, because communicating is not the giving of the message, it's the receiving of the message and the action that comes after. And that's what most people forget. And the number of times I've had clients say to me, and I'm sure you have as well, Ali, but I've emailed them. But I've communicated because I've emailed them.
Yes.
It's like, well, so you've sent an email. Did they get it? Well, I sent it.
Yeah. Did they read it?
Did they
read
even
it
look
and
at
interpret it in the right way? Yeah.
Did it even hit their inbox to begin with?
Yeah.
Let alone did they open it, or did they just ignore it because they, like most people, get hundreds of emails a day? And what about, my husband works for a supermarket in driving a truck, and so he doesn't even have a work email account. And so actually he might, but I don't know if he knows what it is. So somebody saying to him, I emailed you, it's like, well, I've been in the truck for the last 8 hours. So when do you expect me to log in and look?
Yeah.
Not while I'm driving, surely.
Yeah, safety first. Do not recheck your emails while you're driving, people.
Exactly.
But yeah, and again, I think that really comes back to being like aware of the audience and what they're sort of doing. And audience, whether it's audience is your team or audience who are your customers, or whether it's audience for sort of a broader network, and going, okay, well, how are people actually going to receive this? And maybe it's not one platform or one way. It's going, how do we do a capture all and make sure everyone is getting that? But more importantly, how do we know that they know?
Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to back to your original question, is often how are you perceived by other people? So if you're trying to build relationships with people, do they perceive you in the same way that you believe you are being perceived? So, and that comes back to how self-aware are you?
Yeah.
Do you have a level of self-awareness that matches what other people think of you, or do you not? And while most people would say they have a high level of self-awareness, the research shows that most people do not.
Yes. Have you got any tips? I know we're going to get to tips later, but have you got any, because that's a big piece of it, right? Going, the people that think they're self-aware often are not, and then they're blindsided, or there's a sort of a surprise event that happens. They're like, oh, I had no idea. Yeah. Have you got any, how do you think people become self-aware, or how do they measure their self-awareness if they're going, oh, I don't know which camp I'm in?
Becoming more self-aware is really hard, because it can be really confronting to do the evaluation and the reflection, and to give yourself permission to have difficult thoughts about your behaviour. But one of the ways that you can, if you do want to become more self-aware, or if you want to evaluate how self-aware you might be, then you need to think about how do you ask more questions and have more curiosity. And some of those questions might be asking people how they see you, asking people for 2 or 3 words that they might use to describe you and see whether those words fit in with how you would describe yourself. But also being curious around your own thoughts and actions or behaviors. And if somebody is surprised or offended by something that you say, or if you have a really intense reaction, positive or negative, to something that happens to you or that somebody says to you, then show some curiosity and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? And then the second thing is listen to other people and listen to yourself. And I know there's been a lot of times where I've said something and then just gone, oh my God, how did those words come out of my mouth? Yes. And when you do that, that's a good opportunity for you to look back later and go, why did I say that? Did I mean it? Or was it just a not thinking? And if it wasn't thinking, how often do I do that? And what's the impact of that? And how would that change or impact on the other person's perception of who I am? Do they now think I'm an idiot? Or do they think, oh, she's just had a brain fart?
I've not heard anyone else say that. I say that as well. Whoops, had a brain fart. Oh, good.
I just say menopause brain. That gets away with a lot.
I love it. I love it. And I think, introspection is so difficult, and we often don't do it until it comes to, in the corporate world specifically, until it comes to, 360-degree feedback or reviews. And we go, oh, that was unexpected.
Yeah.
Yes. Or if we have some kind of, sort of life crisis where we really have to dig deep. And I was speaking to someone yesterday and they're like, do some navel gazing. And I was like, do some inner work. Yes. I love it.
Love the navel gazing expression.
Yeah. But I'm not sure about you for your own practices, but a big part of my sort of weekly cadence is reflection on going, how did things go? What happened? How am I feeling? How did I respond? Was that the best possible way? Or what can we do better? Do you have a practice for your own, I guess, continual development around self-awareness? Because it's like an onion, right? It keeps...
I do. And I do exactly what you've just articulated, but I also do a lot of, I read a lot of business books and I read a lot of biographies and autobiographies, and I read a lot of novels, and I look at the characterization that comes through in all of these books, and I think, what did I learn from that? And particularly when I'm reading a novel, I think, why do I have this sense of discomfort because that character did that thing?
Oh, wow.
That's good. Some books I've just I don't have the brain space to sit in this discomfort. I'm just going to ditch that book and return it. It's not for me. But sometimes I'm like, I think I've got that discomfort because I found myself in that situation, or I'd hate to be in that situation, or or I can imagine myself and I don't think I'd react that way, but deep down, maybe I really would. And so that can be really giving that can be another helpful way of just working out what you believe and why you believe it and why you think the way you do.
That inner knowing, right?
Yeah, which comes back to the third thing that you can do to become more self-aware. So you can ask questions, you can listen, and you can observe. And so observe behaviors and actions of other people, but also observe your own. And so observe when things don't quite go right, if you get, for example, if the hairs on your neck suddenly stand up because of something and you've observed that, it's hard not to, or your spidey senses start tingling, then why? What is it that has caused that to happen to you? You've observed this feeling. Now start asking some questions around, why is this happening? Because it always happens for a reason. And good leaders know how to interpret those feelings. It's like the gut instinct. It's that third thing. You've got your heart, you've got your head, and you've got your gut. And too often we forget about listening to our gut.
Yeah. I think we're conditioned, right, to make sensible, logical decisions, whereas in actual fact sometimes we need to make less sensible or less logical decisions and go with what actually feels right in this instance as well. You've mentioned a few times around building relationships, whether it was with your stakeholders from that government project or whether it's around helping leaders build that relationship, and I'm assuming by relationship you're meaning connection. How do you think the importance and understanding of connection has sort of become a little bit more front of mind, particularly over the last couple of years? I've noticed it. You and I have talked about this before, but what do you think What are you seeing now when it comes to connection and placing the importance on it?
I'm seeing a lot of disconnection and disengagement. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we spend so much time on our phones and staring at a screen that we forget to actually pick up the phone and make a telephone call to talk to people. And as much as I love hybrid work and working remotely, you don't get the same impact when you're having a conversation with somebody through a screen as you do when you're in the same room, particularly because you can only see a part of them. So, we're looking at each other through Zoom at the moment, and we can really only see each other sort of from the shoulders up. And so there's a lot of things that you can learn from somebody about what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable, for example, when you're in the same room as them, because you can see how close do they stand to you? What is their body language? Are they twitching? Are they a foot tapper? Do they bite their nails? All of those things show you something about somebody's personality and behavior that can be really insightful when it comes to building a relationship with them.
Yeah, I love that. And why do you think there's a bit more of an emphasis on it now? Because I agree. I think there's a lot of disconnection. I think we've got to a point now where we can literally be checked out, and there is hybrid work, and there's teams that are working remotely around the world and have been for a number of years. What I'm seeing, and you tell me if you either agree or disagree, is that people are almost craving connection now. I fingers crossed hope at some stage there's going to be some kind of social media blackout and we all have to, leave the house or leave the office and actually go and interact. She says it's like there's new social platforms coming out every day. But I do wonder where this craving for connection has come from. For me, it seems like it's sort of popped up this year, where we're talking, we know that we get more things done in a room. We know the power of bringing people together for meetings or for conferences or conventions and that type of thing. But it's almost like people now are actively seeking out that.
I definitely agree with you. But however, having said that, I think the people who seek it out are the people who realize that's what was missing. So I'm a member of the Caloundra Chamber of Commerce, and once a month they do a coffee morning on a Friday morning, and it's very informal. And the last, 8 or 9 have been sold out. So when I first joined, they never sold out. You could just rock up and get a spot on the day. But probably all of the ones this year and the last couple of last year, they were so oversubscribed. Because people are realizing that it's a good opportunity to get out and meet people in a very non-threatening environment. And even this morning, I got home and they go from 8 till 9. I got home at 10:15 this morning because I was just having these great conversations with people and none of us needed to leave. And so we didn't. And I'm seeing that with conferences that I'm going to, with other events that I'm attending. There's just so many people turning up. However, I'm not so much seeing it in terms of people going back into the office for my client. And some of the conversations I'm having with my clients is how can they be encouraging people to come back in? And they have to. If you really want your people to come in on a regular basis, you need to give them a reason to. And if they're going in and they're just going to spend the whole day on Zoom meetings, that is not a reason, because they can do that at home. So you need to have a reason to bring people together. Last week, one of my clients, I ran a workshop in Brisbane in person for a client, and one of the women who came was on annual leave because she'd moved house the day before. And she said, I was determined to be there because I was determined to be in the same room as my team, who I only get to see all of them once or twice a year because they're all around up and down the east coast of Australia. And I thought, that's what organisations need to do. They need to give people a compelling reason so that they can't say no. They don't want to say no because they'll have too much FOMO if they do.
Yes. Kick in a bit of FOMO. I always think a bit of peer pressure is good.
It is. It is.
Bit of FOMO, bit of peer pressure, gently and kindly, of course, but for all the right reasons. But I love that. So what's the compelling reason to bring people together, and is it a shared?
Yeah. And it might be, maybe you have to put on a lunch once a month or once a week. And get a good chef in, or get, good catering. The money is worth it because you'll get ideas and encourage people to have conversations and to meet different people. One of my clients, however, they do a lot of work with new graduates, and they're finding it really difficult to persuade new graduates to go into the office, particularly the ones who have done all of their university and some of their schooling online because of COVID. And so they don't see the point, because they've managed to get through the last 3 years without having to leave their house or get out of their pajamas in some cases, I'm sure. And so they are really struggling, and they're trying to work out, how do we attract the right people and in a competitive market, and at the same time tell them you have to come into the office 3 days a week.
And for some of them, and I think even if we talk about social interaction and your ability to have conversations, I know I'm an extrovert. I love talking to people. I love meeting people. I'm someone who enjoys conversing and talk about talking and talk about communication for a living. But I know certainly when I came back from mat leave, so having sort of like a year isolated with a tiny person, and whilst it was very, very fulfilling, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do that, I noticed certainly returning to the office back in my corporate days, I could not string a sentence together. I couldn't make eye contact with people, and I had lost my ability to converse, and I had to really actively try to re-engage myself to be able to have those conversations. And I can only imagine for people, particularly new graduates who don't even have a baseline to go, oh, here's how it used to be.
Exactly.
Versus now, and learning a whole new skill that is in some instances quite vulnerable.
And also realizing that so much of when you start a new job, so much of the way that you learn is through osmosis and through being in the office and through asking, listening and observing. And you can still ask and listen through a screen, but you can't observe how somebody does their job, and you're hindered because you don't get to listen in on all of the phone conversations or all of the conversations, the snippets of conversation that you hear from people walking past your desk, or when you go to the loo, or when you go to the tea room, or when you go to the cafe downstairs to get a coffee. It's all of these things that provide opportunity that if you've never experienced it, how would you know that? And so as employers, how do they encourage people to come in and share that's the experience that they get when they're in a workplace that cares about their people?
My gosh.
There's a lot to unpack.
Let's get into the culture. No, we'll save that for another. We'll save that for episode point 2. So just on the topic of, I guess, some of those new grads coming in, what would be your tips that you either wish you knew when you were a new leader, or that you potentially pass on to pave the way for some of these new and emerging leaders? What's your top 5?
Oh, look, my top 5, my number 1, and we haven't even talked about this, is look after your health. Know what's going on in your body and your mind. And if you haven't had a doctor's appointment in a year, then maybe go and have one. If you haven't had all the usual bits checked out, your hearing, your sight, your skin checks, your cholesterol check, your blood test, mammograms, prostate, all those fun things, depending on, your age and your gender, get it looked at, because a little thing going wrong can derail a career really quickly, especially if it's not caught in time. The second thing I think is don't burn bridges. When you leave an organisation, leave on the best terms possible. Even if you hate every second of working there, be gracious in, departure, because the world is a very small place and you never know when an opportunity will come from somebody who you have previously worked with. The third thing I think is have really clear boundaries in place. Know your values, know your priorities, and know when you're prepared to open the gate for a boundary to be, tweaked slightly. And off the back of that, remember that the way that you start a new job is the way that people will expect you to continue. And so if you start a new job and you work late every night, they will expect that you will do that forever. But if you start a new job and you leave on time every night, then they will expect that you will do that forever.
Gosh, such a good lesson.
So I wish I'd learned that in my first job. Is that 3? I think that's 3. I had about 12 things.
I think that's 4. So you've got look after your health, don't burn bridges, have really clear boundaries, and start as you continue, as you intend to continue.
And then the last one is learn how to communicate with conviction so that you can influence, engage, inspire, and motivate.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Mel, for sharing this. We could probably go on for hours, so we'll talk about next.
We'll stop.
We'll talk about next topics, and we will stop and just continue this offline. But for those of people that want to connect with you, where do you hang out mostly?
So you can find out more about me through my website, melkettle.com. And I spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn, Instagram, and I've just joined Threads. So we'll see how that compares to Twitter. I do love Twitter. So yeah, any of those places, or you're welcome to just shoot me an email, hello@melkettle.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing your expertise on our series of Leadership Your Way.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ali.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode on the Made for More podcast, please make sure you subscribe to receive future episodes. And of course, 5-star reviews are always welcome on the Apple Podcast. If you'd like a copy of the show notes or any of the links mentioned today, check out madeformore.com.au/podcast. And of course, if we aren't connected already, you can find me in all the usual places. Ali Nitschke on LinkedIn, ali.madeformore on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you have an awesome week, and I'll catch you again soon. Bye-bye.